So moving on to the last part of our feedback on the GM Moving evaluation today, and thus far we've already looked at the definition of GM moving and established that there isn't a clear definition, but that a movement towards people understanding it as a social movement for physical activity. We've looked at the extent to which, therefore, physical activity is seen to be integrated with and across sectors, enhancing the work of people across the system. And this final part now we're going to be looking at the ways in which GM Moving are trying to work in a different way to actually be able to achieve that aim of integration. And this isn't the place to describe in detail what those ways of working are, but they centre on genuine collaboration, participation of both individuals and communities, but also stakeholders across the system, as well as really focusing on distributed leadership, so to empower people across the system to influence where their spheres of influence are. So because GM Moving are trying to work in different ways, it's gathered quite a lot of interest and intrigue from partners who are really looking in and trying to understand how this works. And what is now being recognised is that it is actually a new system of working. So if you can see on the slide here, we've got one arrow which indicates the existing system, which might be more traditional, siloed, working with strict accountability frameworks within particular sectors. And then the new ways of working might be described as the second arrow coming from within the system, but not incremental change from it. And if you have an interest in this model of system transformational system change, then it comes from the Two Loops model from the Berkana Institute, which we're finding to be an interesting and useful way to describe what's happening in GM Moving or in GM, and how far GM Moving have come. So one of the principles of that model is that in order to simulate a new way of working, those within the existing system need to protect the space, as it were, for perhaps more radical thinkers to generate different ways of working. So we asked ourselves, are there protectors within the system? And in actual fact, it was recognised by partners that there were some really key strategic protectors within the system who operate at chief executive level, and the mayor himself, and as described by one of the partners, create an air pocket within which GM Moving can work. However, it was highlighted that that air pocket wasn't consistently demonstrated across the system, and in fact there are a number of sceptics, not actually spoken to by us in the sample, but referred to by partners. And for them, there is a real gap in their understanding and their appreciation of the different ways of working that we're describing. And even the language of systems change and complexity is off-putting for them. And this finding was underscored by our early survey results, which highlighting that whilst there are some engaged leaders, there is a perception overall that senior leaders and elected members in place are not as fully engaged in this work as they might be, and indeed as they were perceived to be last year. So whilst partners perceived that there were some gaps in that strategic buy-in, where they saw really strong development in GM Moving over the last couple of years has been in what they were describing as sideways influence. And this is an early indication of distributed leadership, where GM Moving and the ways of working have been seen to influence other huge agendas, such as food poverty, knife crime, and mental health, where the principles and the ways of working around collective action and collaboration have been adopted by those other areas who are looking at GM Moving as a way to operate across the system. And in addition to that, people have seen that this is a way of really engaging with communities and hearing the voice of communities. And there are examples over the last couple of years of the voice of people in the heart of communities being heard right up to national levels. This finding again has been underscored by the survey results that suggest there's been an improvement in effective cross-sector working since last year, and that's partly to do with the way that GM Moving has operated. It's also partly a general trend where COVID has necessitated a lot of bureaucratic processes being placed to one side whilst people have responded to that, the urgency of the crisis. So here we really have a system in which partners see themselves sort of caught between two worlds. On one hand, they are interested and intrigued and want to know more about how GM Moving is working, particularly around areas that where they're enhancing and not seeking to claim attribution of any changes that might be observed, whereas partners recognise strongly that they still are caught in a situation where perhaps they need to control things, they feel they need to manage risks. And so we definitely recognise that there is a stage to which people feel that they're interested but not necessarily ready to jump into the new system. And it's possible that this is because whilst GM Moving have made great strides in understanding how to work differently and really listening to people at different levels, from communities through to senior stakeholders, how to work differently, actually what they recognise is a challenge to operationalise. And in truth, there's a recognition that still, whilst there's a shift in language, most of the rooms that are occupied are still very white, still pretty middle class, and that there is a particular sector of like-minded people, that the extent to which that reaches out into different places is questioned. And this again is underscored by early survey findings that suggest that the communities themselves are not as involved in the work of GM Moving or the GM Moving local pilot compared to last year. That might be understandable because of the challenges of remote working and the impacts of COVID itself, but one would think this is an absolutely critical aspect to address in the coming months if the ambition of GM Moving to contribute to the GM-wide attempt to deal with inequalities is to be made good. And so the final aspect is that whilst these new ways of working have been shown to be particularly efficacious during the COVID response, with GM Moving, due to its flexibilities, has been able to support rapid responses, providing bikes and allowing people to work in different areas to really just to support the community and respond to that urgent need. There has been a real reckoning in the sense to which the system is ready to sort of take on the biggest challenges. So, for example, it was seen widely that there was an opportunity to really push forward on the active travel agenda, but it was noted that the system wasn't quite ready for that. The consultation, the plans, changing drivers' hearts and minds to be able to accept sharing of road space, for example, is just not ready to be capitalised upon. And in addition to that, whilst the stakeholders and participants in the research highlighted that they recognised GM Moving was trying to do things differently, they did still come back to the question of, is this working? Is it making a difference to active lives? And that really again highlights this sort of being caught between two worlds, because if this is a social movement or a rhizomatic approach, then it probably it needs, extra work to think about, well, what actually are we looking for by way of impact? So, for example, on internal organisations and actors, and externally on culture and systems, what does good look like? Of course, we all want to improve population levels of physical activity, but what are the steps that we're going to get us there? And how are we going to surface the data and the evidence and the stories that will support people to bridge the divide? So that concludes the update from the GM Moving evaluation today. Thank you very much for listening.